Hi, everybody, and welcome to Reigniting Small Business. I'm Patrick Lee, and joined today by Laura Richards, COO of Spark Business Institute. Hello, Laura.
Hey, Patrick.
So we've reversed roles a little bit today, and you'll see why very quickly. I am in the driver's seat as we explore how social structures and norms, and even more recently, the pandemic, have impacted the entrepreneurship journey for women. And you, Laura, are a woman, so we're talking to you.
That's right, Patrick. Um, so everybody knows being an entrepreneur is difficult, right? Being a successful entrepreneur is even harder. And for women, a lot of times it's harder still because the odds are stacked against us. But despite all of this hard stuff, female entrepreneurship is on the rise in the US.
Yeah, and to lend some data to that, a research survey from Gusto found that approximately 40% of female entrepreneurs launched their businesses as a direct result of the pandemic. So we've seen this, we've talked about this rise in entrepreneurship in general, but 40% of current female entrepreneurs did this because of the pandemic. That's pretty big, and a rise in female founders. That's a good thing, obviously, for women and society. And there's some interesting reasons why it's a good thing. It's not just that we want more entrepreneurs and we want more women entrepreneurs, but it's also because women take a unique approach to that entrepreneurship. Okay. They're 1.17 times more likely than men to found a business that doubles as a social venture. And they're 1.23 times more likely to pursue environmental ventures, environmental focused ventures than just economic focused ventures. And that's according to the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Research. So, they're bringing a whole different perspective to how they approach entrepreneurship.
Right. So we see women are a lot more likely to found businesses fueled by personal passion. And the US Trust Insights on Wealth and Worth found that women are more inclined to want their investments aligned with their values, while men are more likely to compartmentalize. They compartmentalize their investments, then moral and political values in another. And that was according to Joseph Keefe, who was then president and CEO of Pax World Management.
Yeah, and as I just pointed out, it's not just the women-owned businesses that are burgeoning right now, right? It's across the U.S. Startups are booming. In fact, I think we said in a previous podcast that this is the most startups in like over 20 years, right? But we saw a similar rise in small business startups after the 2008 Great Recession. And it just so happens that you were opening your restaurants, or at least one of the restaurants, right around that time. So what was your experience?
Well, it's interesting. One thing I identify with now, and that was similar then, is that I wanted to have control of my destiny. And I think a lot of people are feeling like they'd like to have control of their destiny right now, and they're exiting the workforce and starting startups. So in that way, it's similar. But when I opened the Annapolis store in 2007, it was a really, really hard time because right in 2008, we had, the full force of the recession, and dining out was really, really hit hard. Fast casual, which was what my concepts were, saw the biggest decline. And I really had to get creative. I am thankful. I started these restaurants naively thinking I would be doing marketing for the rest of my life and I'd hire really good GMs to run the restaurant. But this was one of those times where I could fall back on that marketing skill because I developed relationships that sustained the restaurants while I didn't have the foot traffic. So the Naval Academy, the hospital, all the local schools. And fortunately, it worked out okay. I had to break out of the franchise mold that I was given. But in the end, I was able to make payroll and survive.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a whole nother issue because when you're looking to how you can change things up, how to expand, how to handle situations like that, access to capital is super important. And we know that access to capital is actually harder for women, and particularly women of color, than it is for men. And here's a startling and almost freaky statistic. Just 2.2% of venture capital went to female founded startups in 2018. So like that's staggeringly, that's just that leaves me speechless. So when you were getting started though, what was your experience with capital? How did you get your financing, and what was your experience?
Well, first, let me say, if I had it to do all over again, I would definitely get educated first. So anybody that's listening to this podcast who hasn't already been through this, definitely talk to multiple banks before you make a decision. Kind of like getting an estimate on a big project on your house. You don't want to take the first one unless you have a very well developed relationship with a bank or a banker. I didn't have banking relationships, and I came from a corporate background and didn't really have small business expertise. So, not knowing what I didn't know, I was referred to a bank by the franchisor. It wasn't a bank that I had any relationship with, and it wasn't one that ended up treating me very well. In the end, I refinanced all three restaurants with a local banking relationship that I had made, and it was a very positive situation. And I now have that relationship to help my clients. So, the other piece of information I would put out there is we have to get comfortable with putting ourselves out there, our mission, our dreams, why we're worth partnering with. What are we bringing that's unique to the situation, and why should they take a chance on investing in us? I think that women aren't necessarily used to selling themselves in that way. There's a sense of bravado maybe that we shy away from, but yeah, I think doing that and forging those relationships is a critical component.
Yeah, and there is good news in this, and that is that what is called gender lens investing is beginning to gain traction. And what gender lens investing is it's strategies that address gender disparity issues and or analyze gender issues to illuminate investment decisions. So it's holding up that mirror, it's giving out that information, it's beginning to try to acknowledge that startling statistic and put some opportunities in folks' hands.
It's good to hear. We do still have a really long way to go. We know, despite all the federal relief efforts that we had through the CARES Act, through the pandemic, like the Paycheck Protection Program, a lot of female entrepreneur and small businesses were still struggling through that. So according to a recent survey by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the number of female business owners who ranked their businesses' overall health as somewhat or very good fell 13 points during the pandemic. So that was from 60% in January to 47% in July of 2020. Yeah. So by contrast, the number of male business owners reporting good business health status only fell 5 points in the same period. So Patrick, you and I talk about these issues a lot just between the two of them because we think they're pretty fascinating. But there's some gender differences that play into kind of each of the areas that we're touching on today. And I'm just wondering, are male business owners prone to kind of play down their anxiety around this issue?
Well, that's a fascinating topic, and there's a book out there that I've recommended to so many folks called The Confidence Code, and it's by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman. And what that book is basically showing is that men and women approach their career aspirations with a different set of skills. Men are extremely confident, excuse me, and they behave confident whether or not they have anything to back that up with. Women behave with a lack of confidence and therefore become fixated on competency, and they are constantly doubling down on becoming more and more and more competent, overdoing the competency to adjust for the lack of confidence. So you have this situation where the guy's going to step forward and say, oh yeah, I can take that on, I can do that, or I'm just going to plow forward. And you have the woman who probably could do it with the level of competency that she's gotten to, going, well, I don't know, I could handle this better, maybe I've never done that before, and so you end up with that weird dichotomy happening. And I think that really does show up at some level in all this gender disparity playing out for women, right? I'm not saying it's everything, but it plays a role for certain.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because we're seeing a lot of women that are just beginning to take on roles that defy social expectations, right? Women in the C-suite, for example, and more female entrepreneurs. But it still isn't the norm. And I think we have to understand that this didn't happen overnight, right? We have a very patriarchal foundation. Our laws, our court cultures, religions, our politics are all built on this foundation. So this is a slog, and we've got to fight our way through it, and we're doing it. But we have to acknowledge it, I think, and recognize that the system is built this way. We face stigma and discrimination, so we need to work twice as hard as putting our best face forward.
Okay, and so make that personal. What have you felt this personally, and what does it look like for you?
Absolutely, I felt it. When I opened the restaurants, I was the only female franchisee. And 10 years later, I was still the only solo female franchisee. There'd be two husband and wife teams after 12 years. So very much the restaurant industry is male dominated. You don't see very many female, even owner operators or operating managers for that matter. So I've certainly felt it. I felt it in my marketing career as well. Acknowledging that is, I also know that I bring a whole host of things that my male counterparts don't. So I think playing on those strengths, I'm a huge collaborator. I'm a huge relationship maker. That really helped me. When the company was averaging 5% catering, I was averaging 20% catering for my ability to forge those relationships and make them work for all the parties that are involved in that. I can look at my retention. I had a general manager that worked for me for 10 years when the industry average is a 400% turnover. So I think certainly there are strengths that women have that lend to our success, and we need to lean heavily on those while acknowledging the areas that we're weaker.
So let's make this specific to confidence, though, because we just talked about the confidence piece. What was your confidence level throughout this, and not and how did that impact? Did you grow more confident, or did you stay unconfident, or were you confident the whole time? Like, what happened there?
That's an excellent question. So I always tell people, I think it takes 5 years to not feel like an imposter. Like the imposter syndrome is real, and it's hard when you're in a completely new industry. It's not like I was running restaurants and then I bought a restaurant. I was a corporate marketer and I bought a restaurant. You can't expect that you're going to have that. So, you got to recognize also you're playing on your own dime, or, it's like going to school on your own dime. That said, I think I was more confident after 5 years because I had built up everything myself. In other words, I didn't inherit one way of doing it and have to adapt to another way of doing it. Once I got on board with myself, I did it the same way all the way through. And so yes, I think you grow confidence, certainly.
Okay, so that brings up that you were a brand new small business owner, right? Brand new franchise owner. Like you said, you came up in corporate. You were taking on a whole bunch of business aspects, whereas before you were strictly marketing focused. And for folks who are doing startups and who have skill sets that lean in one direction, that they're strong in here, but maybe they don't know here. I think that the support network that they build becomes really important for making sure success is possible, right? What did your support network look like? Did you go as far as to have a mentor? I mean, what did you do to get that support?
Yeah, I see a theme here. I'm reading my own notes, and 5 years seems to be a theme. So for the first 5 years, I was really, really in the weeds, and I didn't have time to create a lot of external relationships outside of California Tortillas. So my relationship with the franchisor, I was on the franchise advisory board, and that gave me an opportunity to kind of work with other California tortilla owners and the franchising group. So that was some support, but it was pretty insular. But as I grew in my competency, I had a little bit more time to develop external support systems. And one of those was my relationship with my advisory um, council. And the business advisory really, really helped me because I could see other businesses out and outside the restaurant business and other owners and their evolution with their businesses. So when we processed their issue, I could learn from it. When they processed my issue, they could learn from it. So that was really critical, I think, to my evolution. And then, making relationships with my local chamber of commerce as well as all the people in my shopping center. So those were super helpful. And actually, Patrick, that's how you and I met. And I highly I hold that relationship and that experience with Chesapeake Think Tank as being one of the most core reasons why I was able to successfully sell my businesses and get out of that with my um, everything intact.
Well,
Truly. Yeah.
yeah, and thank you for that. You said a bit earlier that men will compartmentalize things, and for women, it's the whole thing, right? And so, you know, looking at that, you had a reason why you wanted to do franchises, and it had to do with your household, right? It had to do with the family thing, and so all those things, I think, end up connecting. And so, if when women are establishing themselves in their careers, right, and there's a little bit less confidence, but there's also a whole nother side of things that never gets compartmentalized. So, how did that work for you?
So I kind of know where you're going with this, Patrick. I feel like, right, if a woman is overly confident, a lot of times she gets called aggressive, or there's a worse name for it that I won't put into this podcast. So I'm a pretty hard driving person, and I'm hard driving at home as well. And I'm a pretty emotional person. So I'm passionate and I'm fiery and I get behind things. Um, but I find in business, I have to work to moderate those things pretty hard. And I haven't always been as good as I am today, but I can get an upsetting email and not respond to it for 24 hours. That's to give you an example. Sometimes it's best to think about things for a little while, and I didn't learn that until later on in my career. I think also just fake it till you make it. If you don't feel confident about something, no one needs to know that but you. Now, at home, I'm a vulnerable mess. My family can see if I am not feeling confident about something, but I know everybody, not everybody, but Brene Brown has a whole book about, being vulnerable and doing that in the business place. There is a way to be vulnerable. I every day want to show up and be my best authentic self. So I'm going to show some of my human vulnerability, but you have to be a leader, and to lead, you can't lead with your vulnerability and your emotion all the time. There's appropriate places for it to come in.
Yeah, and that's a great piece too. I think fear is another big piece of this, right? And no one goes into any startup, any business with a guarantee of success. Far from it, right? And so that fear of the known potential issues, but also just fear of the unknown, I think is a major issue. And obviously, if men are gutting through it by overconfidence and compartmentalization, I'm guessing that women with already a tendency to be a little less confident around things, that this is probably a major issue. So, did you face fear of failure? And if you did, how did you cope? What did that look like?
I faced fear of failure daily. Yeah, for most of the first few years. You know, um, I strove to prove the doubters wrong. So my whole thing is I'm going to double down. I'm going to work twice as hard. And, I'm never going to let this paralyze me. I feel it. I know I feel it. I might cry to myself at night, but, um, you know, again, sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it. And I did do that. And you start to see small successes. You start to overcome things, and you put that in your, quill or whatever you call that. You start collecting your wins, and then over time that confidence becomes real.
Yeah. And I also think it's, for folks who stand out there and want to sort of say, well, we think this whole gender thing is overstated. It's women don't have as hard a time as they make it out to be. Things are more equal than people realize and all. I'm not going to argue with you on that. Okay. But I am going to point out one of these disparities of responsibility that seems to stay pretty skewed in this particular area. And that is that most women aren't just, and most women entrepreneurs aren't just being entrepreneurs and owning their business. They're also going home, and they're typically still in charge of the household. That's sort of that tradition that's been there for a very long time in our society. And though there's definitely trends away from it in its entirety, it's still hugely skewed in that direction. I'm assuming that was your role also.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, when I signed my franchise agreement, and up until shortly before, like a few months before the Annapolis restaurant opened, I was a single mother of 3-year-old twins. Actually, there were 5 by the time the restaurants opened. And I then, shortly after Annapolis opened, was married, but then I married a pilot, and he was often not home. So, yeah, that definitely, keeping the work-life balance is rough. And I would tell anyone they should make sure they have help at home before they open a business. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to open a successful new venture without having some kind of help at home. So I had an au pair, and that really was critical. I really needed to do that. There were weeks where I would see my kids, only at night if my mom or the nanny brought the kids to the restaurant for dinner.
Yeah.
Granted, this was only, for a few years, but my goal with the restaurants was I wanted to be able to be there for my kids. I did not want to have latchkey children. I was a latchkey child. And it worked out. By the time my kids were in 4th grade, I was able to take them to school and pick them up every day from then to the time they graduated from high school and drove themselves. So there was a happy ending in there, but it was a lot of hard work in the middle.
Okay. So we're coming to the end of our podcast today. And I think there's a lot to your story, and it's hard to sort of synopsize it all in 20 minutes, which is what we've tried to do. But what is the key advice that you would give to some of these new female startups? What should those owners consider? What is the key takeaways they should take away?
Honestly, the most important thing I can tell folks is whether you have an accountability partner, a coach, or a therapist, it's really, really important that on your journey, you keep yourself balanced, taking care of yourself as well as the business and your family, and save yourself from burnout. And if you haven't already listened to our episode on burnout, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that, because it's very prevalent for folks right now. And when you have your own business, you can't walk away from it. Well, you can, but it takes a little bit more time than quitting a job. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Laura. That was very interesting. I hope everybody got something from this podcast. We will be back again next week. Hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.